Hi there, Year 12. This video is designed to help you understand what it is we expect from your Biology Assessment Task 3, which is your research task. This video is to make sure everyone's got the same consistent information, and then it's really clear how we expect you to set out your report as well. So this is your third task for your HSC Biology course. The weighting is 25% and it's due on Wednesday the 8th of June at the end of school, 3:25 p.m. and that'll be in week 7. So you're going to have about 4 weeks to work on this particular task. Now, usual things with any assessment task, information here about if you're going to be absent, if you're going to be away for any reason, what to do if you're sick or unwell. Key point is you need to let your teacher know as soon as you know if you're going to be away on those days or the days leading up to it. Because it is an online submission, you should still be able to submit it even if you are away at an excursion or a sports event, for example. But please let your teacher know so you can make preparations for that as well. If you do submit it late, then you're likely going to get a 0 mark for this assessment. So please just let your teachers know and keep them in the loop if anything should come up. As usual, if you're going to be unable to complete the assessment because you're sick or unwell, then you need to let Mrs. Collette know, you need to let Mrs. Litchfield know, you need to loop in your teacher as well, and also have some evidence from your doctor to allow that illness and misadventure to be considered. Now the topic is going to be, or the topic content assessed is going to be Module 7, Infectious Diseases, and these here are the outcomes lifted straight from the Biology HSC syllabus that we're going to be assessing in this particular assessment. You'll notice most of them are skills-based things similar to the DEP study, but this Bio 1214 here is the one that relates directly to infectious diseases. So let's talk a bit more about the task itself and the task description. So you're going to play an interactive game called Plague Inc. and you're going to document your play. Now, Plague Inc. is a game you can get on your phone, on your iPad, on your computer. It costs about 99 cents. If you need to be reimbursed for that, let your teacher know and we can set up that claim so you can get that money back for playing the game. But essentially, you're going to use this game as a scaffold for researching how infectious diseases affect their hosts, how those diseases spread through populations, and how they are dealt with by societies and authorities. So you're going to analyse, assess, and compare how accurate the game is, and you're going to compare that with a real-world similar type of pathogen and disease. Now at the end of this document, the bottom of this document, we've got a detailed marking rubric which will step out each mark and how you get each mark for this assessment. And if you follow that rubric closely, you're going to maximise your chances of getting a great mark for this assessment. You're going to be required to show evidence of gameplay in your report, and this will be done by taking screenshots of the game and then inserting that into the document as well. Your submission is going to be subject to a similarity and plagiarism check when you submit it through the hub. And if your plagiarism or similarity is too high, then you are running the risk of losing marks or even getting a 0 mark for a particular section or for your whole report if we deem that similarity to be inappropriate for this task. Now, a lot of students want to know what the number is they're allowed to have similarity. There's no hard and fixed number. What we're looking for more is passages where it's clearly come up as it have been flagged and it's clear that you haven't made any effort to either reference properly or change the wording of what you found on the internet or the other information or secondary source you get your information from. What you're going to need basically is devices so you can play the game, device so you can access the internet, and a device that you can use for Microsoft Word so that you can submit it through the hub as well. Now, a bit more detailed task description. There's 2 parts of this task that you need to complete. Part 1 is evidence of gameplay. So the version of the game you're going to play in Plague Inc. is called the main game. At the bottom of this document, there is a link to a video that shows you how to find the main game from the Plague Inc. home screen. It is very straightforward, but the video will show you how to get to start the game, and it'll also show you some information on how to find the infectivity, the severity, and the lethality of your pathogen in the game, which is part of what you need to comment on in your report as well. So watch that video to see where to find those things if you don't know already. And then part 2 is the actual research report itself, sections A to F in the rubric below. Again, if you follow that rubric, use it as a scaffold for your report, you're going to maximise your chances of doing really well in this particular assessment. We're not going to assess your CRAP referencing for this particular assessment task. We are going to ask you, though, to have a properly formatted reference list in APA referencing style. Now, when it comes to the game, we're going to recommend that you play through the game at least a couple of times to familiarise yourself with how the game works before you start playing it for your assessment. When you start the game, you open up with having a bacteria as the only pathogen of choice. If you wanted to use a bacteria for your assessment, then that is fine. You don't need to do anything else. If you wanted to use a virus or a parasite, they're probably the three main ones we'd recommend that you look at using. If you want to use one of those other two, though, you're going to need to play the game through at a high enough level to unlock the option to play then as a virus and unlock the option to play through as a parasite or a fungus or any of those other options as well. Now, this here is the rubric itself, and this shows you exactly where each mark is coming from for this particular assessment task. So how to read this? This is the criteria. These are essentially the focuses or the questions that we want you to address in this section of your report. If we jump over to the other side here, this is the evidence. So the evidence is what we're looking for as your markers to see where your marks are coming from and potentially where you're either getting marks from or losing marks when we assess your report. We have our grade level descriptors here, A to E, and then we've got the marks at the top here, which will show you how much each section or each part of each section is worth. Now, take special note here where it says Section A, type of pathogen. So when it comes to writing your report, we want to see some sort of heading or title that says Section A, type of pathogen, and underneath that you're going to address all of this criteria here. Then you're going to find Section B, transmission of pathogen, and underneath that section in your report, you're going to address this criteria here, and so on and so forth, all the way through to Section F. That's how we want you to set this report out. If you do it like that, it's nice and clear, easy for you to follow the rubric, easy for us to follow when we're marking it as well. So let's go through Section A, type of pathogen. So in the game, you're going to identify the type of pathogen you choose, you're going to include a screenshot, and you're going to name the type of pathogen as well. This is a bacteria, this is a virus, whatever it might be. You're then going to choose a real infectious disease that is caused by this type of pathogen and describe the main signs and symptoms of the real life pathogen. So there are your marks there for identifying and describing those signs and symptoms of those pathogens or that disease process from the pathogens. Then what we want you to do is assess the relevant contribution of the symptoms listed above of the virtual disease and the real-life disease in terms of infectivity, virulence, and mortality. At the bottom of this notification, we have a keywords list that tells you what infectivity means, what virulence means, and what mortality means. So we want you to look at the symptoms, signs and symptoms of your virtual disease, the signs and symptoms of your real-life disease, and then assess the contribution those signs and symptoms have in terms of making people sick and potentially killing people. You can see how many marks that assess is worth for a top-level assessment, and again, the criteria, the evidence over here for what we're looking for. Section B is about transmission of the pathogen. So again, we want evidence of your gameplay, a screenshot showing something relevant to transmission of your virtual disease. And then we're going to ask you to compare the transmission of the virtual disease in the game to transmission of the real life disease that you've chosen. So we want to see how accurate it is that the game portrays that transmission of the virtual disease, the pathogen you've chosen for the game, versus what we'd expect to see in real life. Now, Section C is all about adaptations of pathogens to increase infectivity and virulence. So adaptations you should be quite familiar with by now, adaptations of organisms that enable them to survive. So here we want to see evidence of gameplay again, screenshot of relevant adaptation. We want you to explain the adaptations of the virtual pathogen that make it more infectious and virulent. So identify the adaptations that your pathogen, your virtual pathogen in the game goes through, and then explain how that actually makes it more infectious or more virulent. And then we want you to do the same thing, but this time looking at your real-life pathogen. So again, what are the adaptations your real-life pathogen has gone through that helps it become more infectious and more virulent? Section D is all about the populace response to slow or stop the spread and impact of the pathogen. In other words, what is the population doing? What are the countries doing? What are the people in those countries doing to slow or stop the spread of this disease? So again, evidence of gameplay, we want to see at least a screenshot that shows a populace response in the game. And we want you to describe at least 3 responses of the populace to the outbreak of the virtual disease in the game as well. So there'll be different responses that happen in the game, screenshot those, describe what the population is doing, and then we want you to assess the accuracy of the game in how it portrays a population's response to an epidemic or pandemic for the virtual disease. So in the game, it'll give you solutions or suggestions of what the population is doing, and we want you to assess how accurate that is in terms of real world situation where we have an epidemic or a pandemic. So you don't need to compare it to your real world disease. It's still living in the virtual game world here, but you're going to assess how accurate it is that the game has said the country has done this. Is that something that's likely to happen in real life? Now, the big part of this section is propose. I want you to propose potential future management strategies for an epidemic or a pandemic related to the real life disease. So the real life disease you've chosen, let's say it's something like streptococcus, which causes a strep throat or tonsillitis. We want you to imagine a world where that real life disease that you've chosen has become an epidemic or a pandemic. And if you're in charge of the world, what would you suggest to stop or eliminate that spread or reduce that spread and severity of the disease in the population? Now, you can get quite creative here in this section. Just make sure you've got the evidence to back up what you're saying. All right, the next section is section E, which is the WHO response. Now, the WHO is the World Health Organization. So again, we want to see evidence of gameplay. We want you to evaluate the role and response of WHO to your virtual disease and suggest potential additions to the game to more accurately reflect the role of WHO in an epidemic or a pandemic. So the game is going to show you what the WHO does in the virtual world. We want you to evaluate how accurate that is compared to what the WHO does in the real world. So again, here is your marking breakdown. Here's the evidence of what we're looking for here. And then the final section is your references. A reference list is provided in APA style is what we're looking for. 10 or more relevant references, incorrect APA style, and in alphabetical order is worth 4 marks. Now, just a reminder, correct APA style means you're listing the author first. If you can't find the author, then you list the organization. For example, if you get a reference off let's say a newspaper website, let's call it the Daily Bugle, and there's no author listed for that particular article, then the author becomes the organization, which in this case is the Daily Bugle, and then you assume that that is the author for that particular publication for your APA style. If you can't find an author, if there's no organization attached, then you can list the title of the article first, but it's going to be a really rare situation where you can't find an author or an organization. And if you can't find an author or an organization for your particular reference, then maybe you need to question how relevant that reference is for your assessment. Overall, this assessment is going to be graded out of 60. Okay, now down the bottom here is the appendix with some keywords and a couple of links as well. So the video you're actually watching at the moment, you can get to that through this link here, and that's a walkthrough of this assessment to give you a clear understanding of expectation of this assessment task. Key thing is address this rubric, use it as a scaffold, clearly label your sections and address each section as best you can under those section headings. These are definitions of keywords, so identify, which is recognize and name, describe, provide characteristics and features, assess, make a judgment of value, quality, outcomes, results, or size, compare, show how things are similar or different, evaluate, make a judgment based on criteria, determine the value of, propose, which is put forward, an example or a point of view for consideration or action. These are all HSC verbs. You'll find these in the rubric. You can get these off the NESA website as well. We're just kind of giving you a shortcut there to know what we mean by those particular verbs. Now, down the bottom here is really important because you need to talk about infectivity, virulence, and mortality in your assessment. So infectivity is all about a pathogen's ability to spread from host to host. Virulence, on the other hand, is the severity or harmfulness of a disease or a poison. So you might have a disease that's really highly infectious, but is not particularly virulent, doesn't make people very sick, like a common cold might be an example of that. Or you might have a disease that's not very infectious, but is highly virulent. So chicken flu might be an example of that, where it's hard to get chicken flu, but if you get it, you get very, very sick and you're likely to die. Mortality is related to death, and specifically the deaths attributable to the pathogen. So you've probably heard these terms a little bit in the past couple of years with the pandemic and COVID. So if we think of the different waves and the different variants we've had with COVID, the first alpha strain was incredibly virulent. People were getting very, very sick, and they had a pretty high mortality rate, particularly for an airborne disease like that. But infectivity wasn't that high. It was absolutely infectious, but if we compare that to the Omicron variant, the infectivity of Omicron is incredibly high, but the virulence is not as bad as those first strains that came through. So even though more people are catching it, people aren't getting quite as sick, and certainly not as many people are dying as a proportion of the total number that are getting sick. Now, these terms are all relevant terms, so they're a bit hard to, it's not like you have a number for virulence. You're not 9 virulence, or a disease isn't 7 virulence. Virulence is relative to other similar types of pathogens and similar types of diseases. And just a reminder, WHO is the World Health Organization as well. Okay, so that should hopefully clear up or help you understand what it is we're trying to find or trying to get you to do for this particular assessment. As usual, if you have any questions, please ask your teacher. But good luck. We hope you have fun playing the game, and we hope you enjoy doing this particular assessment.